hospitals, before syringes and white coats, before the words doctor or clinic ever existed, there were the African healers, the keepers of balance between the body, the spirit, and the earth. These ancient doctors didn't use machines or microscopes. They used the whispers of the forest, the wisdom of the ancestors, and the language of the elements. Across Africa, every tribe had them. Babalawos among the Yoruba, Sangomas among the Zulu, Ngangas in Central Africa, and Dibia among the Igbo. They were more than doctors. They were spiritual scientists, bridging the gap between the physical and the unseen world. To them, every illness, whether fever, madness, or heartbreak, was not just a problem of the body but of the soul. Healing meant restoring harmony between man, his ancestors, and nature itself. But what were their secrets? How did they cure fevers, drive away curses, or mend broken bones using only what nature gave them? Today, we uncover 7 of Africa's most ancient and powerful healing practices, rituals that cured not just the body, but the spirit, and whose wisdom still echoes in modern medicine. Fever and malaria, the healing power of plants in the dense rainforests of West and Central Africa, where mosquitoes thrive. Fever was one of humanity's oldest enemies. Yet long before the discovery of chloroquine or quinine, African herbalists had already mastered its cure. Among the Yoruba, Igbo, and Congolese peoples, healers treated malaria-like fevers with neem leaves, bitter leaf, pawpaw, and quinine bark, boiled into potent decoctions. But healing was not just a physical process. Fever was believed to be the fire of imbalance, a sign that the spirit within was agitated. Healers would prepare herbal baths mixed with sacred ashes, palm wine, and river water, whispering incantations to cool the spirit and restore balance. At dawn, patients would be led to rivers or sacred trees to bathe, a symbolic rebirth, washing away both the heat of the body and the anger of the spirit. Modern scientists have since found that many of these plants, like Artemisia afra and Vernonia amygdalina, contain strong anti-malarial compounds. What modern medicine calls chemistry, African healers called spiritual alchemy. Mental illness and spiritual disturbance healing the mind and soul. Among the Zulu and Yoruba, mental illness was seen not as madness, but as a message, a spiritual calling or ancestral distress. When someone began to speak to unseen spirits or wander in confusion, elders didn't isolate them. They called the Sangoma or Babalawo. The healer would use divination tools, cowrie shells, bones, or sacred stones to uncover the spiritual cause. Perhaps an ancestor had been forgotten. Perhaps a vow had been broken. The healing involved ritual cleansing baths, burning of herbs like in Fifo, African sage, and chanting songs to calm the spirit. Families would gather around the person, singing in rhythm, restoring their sense of belonging and connection. Herbal teas made from canna, wild daga, and calabash bark were used to calm the nerves and balance mood. Modern psychology calls this community-based therapy. Africa called it Ubuntu. I am because we are. Healing the mind meant healing the bonds between people and their ancestors. Infertility in childbirth, the sacred feminine. To African societies, the womb was sacred, the gateway between worlds. Infertility wasn't just a medical issue, it was a spiritual imbalance. Among the Yoruba, women seeking fertility would visit the river goddess Oshun, the Orisha of love and fertility. They'd offer honey, mirrors, and fruits, asking her to open the womb and bless their lineage. In East Africa, Maasai healers used herbal tonics made from roots of fertility trees, cloves, and scent leaves, believed to awaken the body's life energy. Pregnancy was guided by midwives who knew chants and herbs that eased labor. During childbirth, sacred songs were sung to invite ancestral spirits to protect mother and child. Women often wore protective charms made of cowrie shells, symbols of fertility, around their waist. The shell, shaped like the female form, represented both creation and abundance. Today, These traditions continue in many rural communities where birth remains a ceremony, not just a medical event, a moment when the physical and spiritual worlds unite, curses and witchcraft, protection and cleansing. In ancient Africa, not all sickness came from nature. Some came from envy, jealousy, or spiritual attack. If a person suddenly fell ill with no explanation, they would visit a diviner, not to get medicine, but to find out who or what had caused it. Rituals for breaking curses varied. In West Africa, saltwater baths, smoke cleansing, and sacrificial offerings were common. The healer would use herbs like African basil, garlic, and cowries to cleanse the spirit. In southern Africa, Sangomas used protective powders called izibaya, made from crushed bones and sacred herbs, rubbed onto the skin to repel negative energy. In Central Africa, healers called upon Nkisi spirits to expose witches or thieves and restore spiritual order. But even here, there was humor. A famous saying went, "If your rival's rainmaker can bring rain, just make sure yours brings thunder." Protection was as much about moral harmony as it was about spiritual defense, a reminder that peace in the heart is the greatest shield. Snake bites and poisoning nature's antidotes. In the forests of East and Central Africa, snake bites were common, but panic was rare. Healers knew the forest's secret antidotes. They used herbs like black pepper root, African basil, tamarind bark, and activated charcoal from sacred fire. These were chewed, applied to wounds, or used in poultices to draw out venom. But beyond herbs, the ceremony mattered. The healer often whispered to the wound, calling the spirit of the snake to release its grip. Among the Luya of Kenya, it was believed that venom responded to sound and rhythm. Healers would beat drums softly while applying medicine, maintaining spiritual focus. In many cases, the snake itself was honored. Its tooth or shed skin kept as a charm, symbolizing mastery over death. Science later confirmed that some of these herbs neutralized toxins and blended pharmacology and faith that saved countless lives. Epidemics and plagues, community healing, and ritual purification. When epidemics like smallpox, measles, or cholera struck, ancient Africans didn't run to hospitals, they turned to ritual. Communities would gather for mass cleansing dances, where smoke from sacred herbs like sage and frankincense filled the air to purify space. Victims were isolated, not out of fear, but as part of a sacred quarantine, protecting the village while healers worked. The Yoruba invoked Babalawos, the god of healing and disease, with offerings of grains and palm oil, asking him to calm the wrath of illness. Drums played through the night as healers performed rituals, balancing physical remedies with spiritual protection. These methods, isolation, sanitation, and smoke cleansing, predated modern disease control by centuries. African tradition understood to heal the community, you must purify both the body and the spirit. Broken bones, wounds, and physical injuries, the healer's hands. When a hunter broke a bone or a warrior was wounded, ancient African healers knew exactly what to do. They gathered tree resins, crushed herbs, and animal fats to make balms that soothed pain and accelerated healing. In Ethiopia and Nigeria, traditional bone setters used splints made of bamboo or bark, binding them with cloth soaked in herbal mixtures. But before touching the patient, the healer would pray, asking ancestors for strength and guidance. Healing was as spiritual as it was physical. In Kenya, the Kamba people combined massage, herbal oil, and song to realign bones, a process that was both therapy and ritual. Modern physiotherapy and natural pain relief techniques trace their roots to these ancient methods, proof that African medicine was both intuitive and scientific. Healing is harmony, the African philosophy of health. In African thought, health is not the absence of sickness, it is the presence of balance. True healing restores harmony between the body, the spirit, the ancestors, and the earth. Healers understood that each person's energy is woven into the web of nature, that herbs, prayers, and music are all threads of one tapestry. They read dreams as diagnostic tools, interpreted animal behavior as omens, and used music to synchronize human emotion with the rhythm of nature. Modern holistic medicine, meditation, and aromatherapy all echoed this wisdom. Africa had long understood what the world is only now rediscovering, that healing is both science and spirit. Conclusion: from fevers to fertility, madness to magic, Africa's healers cured with more than herbs, they cured with understanding. They knew that when the spirit suffers, the body follows, and that when the earth is respected, health flows naturally. Today, many of the remedies, from antimalarial herbs to psychological healing rituals, are studied by scientists worldwide. But beyond medicine lies something deeper, a worldview that sees life as sacred, nature as teacher, and illness as imbalance. To heal, one must return to harmony. Africa's ancient healers remind us the body heals with herbs, the soul heals with love, and the spirit heals with connection.